The Second Crusade, launched with so much hope, ended not with triumph, but with humiliation. By the late 1140s, the grand armies of Christendom that had marched east with banners blazing were limping home, broken by failure, distrust, and exhaustion. King Louis VII of France, whose dreams of glory had once inspired thousands to take the cross, returned a chastened man. His journey back to Europe symbolized the collapse of the entire enterprise. Sailing under Norman escort, Louis was nearly captured by Byzantine warships, his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine briefly taken hostage, and his prestige left in tatters. The kings of Europe blamed each other for the disaster at Damascus. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the monk who had stirred the masses into crusading fervor, was now scorned for promising miracles that never came. For the Crusader states in the Levant, Edessa, Tripoli, and Jerusalem, the collapse of the Second Crusade was not a distant disappointment. It was an existential catastrophe. Without the backing of Western armies, these small, fragile principalities stood exposed to the growing might of the Zengi god Nur ad-Din, the son of the formidable Imad ad-Din Zengi, inherited Aleppo, and his father's relentless vision of uniting the Muslim world against the Latins. Where the Crusaders were fractured by pride and rivalries, Nur ad-Din built alliances, combined resources, and carefully chose his battles. By the time the last crusading knights were sailing for home, he was already preparing the strike that would reshape the struggle for Syria. This was the backdrop to the events that would lead to Inab, world where Latin Christian hopes were sinking, and Muslim power, under Nur ad-Din, was rising with unstoppable momentum. The Crusader states had never been united. Each was ruled by its own prince or count, bound by fragile oaths and constant suspicion. Now, with Europe's kings gone, their disunity became fatal. Nowhere was this clearer than in the county of Tripoli. In 1148, civil war erupted when a disgruntled noble named Bertram seized the castle of Erema, defying Count Raymond II. In desperation, Raymond turned not to his fellow Latins, but to Nur ad-Din himself for help. It was an astonishing act. A Crusader prince seeking aid from the very man sworn to destroy them. Nur ad-Din responded swiftly, marched with his Damascene allies, crushed Bertram's rebellion, and burned his fortress. This episode revealed two truths. First, that the Crusader states were too fractured to defend themselves. Second, that Nur ad-Din was more than a conqueror. He was a strategist who understood when to use force and when to wield diplomacy. To the Muslims of Syria, he was a leader who offered unity. To the Latins, he became a nightmare, a patient enemy who struck when their divisions left them weakest. Antioch was no exception. Prince Raymond of Poitiers, proud and headstrong, had watched his realm slowly eroded by enemies on every side. Yet even as danger mounted, aid from Jerusalem was hesitant, and Europe was far away. With no other allies, Raymond turned to an unlikely partner, the Nizari assassins of Masyaf, bitter enemies of the Sunni Zengids. Their leader, Ali ibn Wafa, agreed to fight against Nur ad-Din. It was a desperate gambler, Christian prince, and a Shia sect standing together against a Sunni coalition. But Raymond had no choice. The storm was coming, and Antioch would have to face it alone. In 1149, Nur ad-Din made his move. With Seljuk allies from Anatolia and troops from Damascus, he threatened Antioch on multiple fronts. Sultan Mesud of Rum besieged Marash, while Nur ad-Din himself struck at Antiochian territory to prevent Raymond from sending aid. Raymond won a brief skirmish at Firmia, pushing the emir back, but Nur ad-Din quickly regrouped. By spring, he had turned his attention to Inab, a key fortress guarding the southern frontier of Antioch. The emir marched with 6,000 cavalry and local levies, laying siege to the walls of Inab. Inside, the garrison held, but they knew Antioch's fate depended on Raymond's response. The prince gathered 4,000 horsemen and 1,000 infantry, bolstered by Ali ibn Wafa's assassins. In numbers, they seemed to match Nur ad-Din's force. But in strategy, the balance leaned heavily toward Aleppo. At first, Nur ad-Din feigned retreat. Hearing that Raymond was approaching with superior numbers, he lifted the siege and withdrew beyond the Orontes River. Raymond interpreted this as weakness. Against the advice of Ali ibn Wafa, he split his forces, garrisoning many soldiers in Inab while leading the rest to pursue Nur ad-Din. The decision proved fatal. By the night of June 28, Raymond's camp lay exposed on an open plain near the Fountain of Murad. The assassins warned him of the danger. The terrain was wide, flat, and vulnerable. But the prince dismissed their fears. He believed the emir was in retreat. In reality, Nur ad-Din's cavalry had doubled back, circling the Crusader camp like wolves in the dark. At dawn, the trap would be sprung. The morning of June 29th broke with the thunder of hooves. Nur ad-Din's army descended on Raymond's camp from every side, a ring of steel and dust closing fast. Panic rippled through the Crusader ranks. Raymond, desperate to escape encirclement, led a ferocious charge with his knights and the assassins. For a brief, blazing moment, it worked. The Frankish cavalry cut through enemy lines, scattering infantry, breaking lances against shields. The clash was deafening, the dust so thick it turned day into twilight. But the illusion of victory did not last. The dust cloud slowed the Crusaders' momentum, blinding them to the movements of Nur ad-Din's horse archers. With ruthless precision, the emir's cavalry closed in from all sides, showering arrows into the chaos. The assassins fought with grim determination, their blades flashing in the melee, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Raymond fought like a lion at the front, refusing to retreat. Ali ibn Wafa fell beside him, his body hacked down in the swirl of combat. Soon, the Prince of Antioch himself was struck down, surrounded and overwhelmed. The Crusader army collapsed. Knights and infantry alike were cut down as they fled. Only a handful escaped to tell the tale. By the end of the day, the field at Inab was a graveyard of banners, armor, and broken bodies. Unlike earlier battles, Nur ad-Din did not let victory slip away. He pressed his advantage, seizing Antioch's territories east of the Amanus Mountains, and reducing the proud principality to a coastal remnant. The fall of Inab marked not just a military defeat, it was the collapse of Antioch's power in Syria. The shock of Inab rippled through Christendom. Antioch was left leaderless, with Raymond's heir, Bohemond III, only a child. Panic gripped the city. Some even proposed surrendering Antioch itself to Nur ad-Din in exchange for mercy. King Baldwin III of Jerusalem rushed north to assume guardianship, but his small force could not restore Antioch's lost lands. Antioch, once the strongest bastion of the north, had been reduced to dependency. Worse still, Edessa, the first Crusader state established in the east, collapsed entirely. Count Jocelyn too was captured by Nur ad-Din's men and died in captivity. His widow, unable to defend the county, sold its fortresses to Byzantium, but the empire could not hold them. Piece by piece, Nur ad-Din and his allies carved up Edessa until nothing remained. By 1150, the oldest Crusader principality was gone. Erased from the map. Nur ad-Din's victories transformed the balance of power. For the first time, a Muslim ruler had united Aleppo and, soon after, Damascus. This was the dream his father Zengi had died pursuing, a united front to drive the Crusaders into the sea. From this foundation would rise an even greater figure, would one day take Jerusalem itself. The Second Crusade, remembered in Europe as a failed venture, in the East was the moment when the tide turned. The defeat at Inab was not as famous as the fall of Jerusalem in 1187, but in many ways, it was the beginning of the end. For the princes of Antioch, for the lords of Edessa, and for the Latin dream of conquest in northern Syria, the plains of Inab became their grave. And yet, history asks us, was it arrogance, disunity, or inevitability that doomed them? If you found this story gripping, subscribe for more explorations into the battles and betrayals that shaped the Crusades. Comment below: was Raymond a tragic hero who fought to the end, or a reckless prince whose pride destroyed Antioch?